If there's one place that captures the violent tug-of-war over Scotland's future, it's Lochmaben Castle. Built by one of Scotland's most revered families, and later strengthened by a man who tried to destroy them. Before the great stone ruins we see today, the site was already a seat of power. In the 12th century, the powerful Bruce family established a timber motte in Bailey Castle, now referred to as the Old Castle of Loch Maben. It stood slightly southeast of the later fortress, closer to the town of Loch Maben. This would have been a relatively simple, if formidable structure, a wooden keep atop an earth mound, surrounded by a defensive palisade. Its location was no accident. The land between the lochs offered natural defences, and the position made it ideal for overseeing movement between the Central Belt and the Solway Firth. Though no formal records mention a structure before the Bruce stronghold, it's likely the area had been occupied or fortified in earlier centuries, possibly even in the Iron Age, like many other strategic hilltop or lakeside sites in Dumfries and Galloway. That original Bruce castle stood for around 100 years, but everything changed in the late 13th century. During the Wars of Independence, King Edward I of England, known to history as Longshanks, or the Hammer of the Scots, launched a military campaign into Scotland. As part of his effort to dominate the southwest, he built a new, far more imposing castle at Loch Maben, choosing a fresh site that jutted into Castle Loch. The Bruce-built timber fortification was abandoned, and in its place rose the English castle's stone fortress, thick-walled, strategically positioned, and symbolically loaded. Loch Maben, in short, went from being a Scottish family seat to an English garrison, and the ruins that remain are those of that transformation. But no garrison holds out forever. Not here. In the winter of 1385, after years of English occupation, the tide turned. Archibald the Grim, Lord of Galloway, and a rising force in Scottish politics, laid siege to Loch Maben. He wasn't alone. Backed by the powerful Earls of March and Douglas, he brought with him not just men, but momentum, a growing determination to reclaim what had been taken. By the early 1380s, Scottish control over its southern territories was beginning to reassert itself. Years of bitter fighting, shifting political alliances, and English overreach had worn thin. The death of Edward III in 1377 and the ascension of young Richard II left England politically unstable, and the Scottish nobility saw an opportunity. Loch Maben, with its commanding position between the lochs and its symbolism as a former Bruce stronghold, was too important to leave in English hands. For Archibald, the illegitimate son of the feared Black Douglas, retaking the castle wasn't just a tactical win, it was a message. The siege lasted 9 days, cold, relentless and hard-fought, conducted in bitter winter conditions. Early February in Dumfriesshire was no friend to either side. Archibald's forces, drawn from the southwest and bolstered by the March and Douglas retinues, encircled the castle, cutting off supplies and testing the defences with repeated assaults. Inside the walls, the English garrison held out, but morale and provisions dwindled quickly. Loch Maben's location, jutting into the loch, once thought of as a strength, now worked against them, making it almost impossible to resupply or escape. It wasn't just a question of force, this was a siege of attrition. The attackers knew what the castle meant, and so did the men inside. When it finally fell on the 4th of February 1385, the message was clear. Loch Maben was Scottish once more. The garrison was overwhelmed and the fortress itself torn down, razed to the ground, not for tactical reasons, but symbolic ones. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a deliberate erasure of Edward's claim in the southwest. A turning point and a warning. For a time, Loch Maben became a ruin. Not yet the moss-covered remains we see today, but a site of shattered stone and reclaimed pride. That moment marked a turning point, one of many in the castle's long history. A brief reclaiming of power in a landscape where ownership never stayed still for long. In the aftermath of Archibald the Grim's siege, control of Loch Maben shifted once again, and with it the castle's role in the story of the Scottish crown. By the early 15th century, the barony and castle had passed into the hands of the powerful Earls of March, but their hold wasn't secure. In 1409, when the 10th Earl was reinstated after a period of forfeiture, he regained much of his former territory, but not Loch Maben. By 1455, it was under the control of Alexander Stewart, Duke of Albany, brother to King James III. But after Albany's death in 1485, the castle and the lordship of Annandale were formally annexed to the crown by Act of Parliament, a royal claim reaffirmed on the 1st of October 1487. In the early 1500s, Loch Maben remained an active royal site. A mason named Glufar was hired to build a new hall in 1504, roofed with timber sourced from nearby woods. That same year, James IV himself visited the castle, and in a rare personal detail was recorded playing cards with Lord Dacre, an English border noble, on the 23rd of August. Robert Lauder was appointed captain and keeper of Lochmaben Castle in 1509, a post he held for over a decade through multiple renewals. James V also made use of the castle. In November 1542, he stayed at Loch Maben while the Scottish army camped nearby on Burnswark Hill. As fires from the encampment flickered across the landscape, the king received word of Scotland's disastrous defeat at the Battle of Solway Moss, a failed invasion of England that ended in chaos and humiliation. This news struck him hard. Already unwell and facing the collapse of his military plans, James left Loch Maben and returned to Falkland Palace in Fife. Less than a month later, on the 14th of December, he died, likely from illness, though many believed the defeat hastened the end. His final days were marked by grief, and when told that his newborn child was a girl, he is said to have muttered, "It came with a lass, and it will go with a lass." With his death, the crown passed to the infant Mary, Queen of Scots, and the country entered yet another uncertain chapter. Loch Maben remained a place of importance throughout the turbulent 16th century. During the War of the Rough Wooing, Lord Maxwell allowed English troops to garrison the castle. In response, Regent Arran launched a siege in November 1545. Artillery was dragged from Edinburgh, and the regent personally handed out silver rewards, drink silver, to the gunners who'd helped breach the defences. Later, in 1565, Mary, Queen of Scots, and her husband, Lord Darnley, arrived at Loch Maben in the wake of the failed Chaseabout raid, a rebellion against Mary led by the Earl of Moray. Just over 2 decades later, in 1588, the castle became the focus of another rebellion. Lord Maxwell, now opposing the Protestant crown, seized the fortress in a bid to challenge James VI. The king responded swiftly, laying siege to Loch Maben with English assistance. The outcome was grim. The castle fell, and its keeper, David Maxwell, was hanged alongside 5 others. In 1592, the castle was reportedly taken once more, this time in a more audacious manner. Francis Stewart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, and a persistent thorn in James VI's side, is said to have taken Lochmaben Castle through trickery rather than force. According to contemporary reports, he disguised himself as a woman, slipping past the guards and gaining entry before revealing his true identity. Once inside, his men followed, overwhelming the garrison and seizing control of the stronghold. This was a bold and theatrical move, entirely in keeping with Bothwell's reputation, and one that embarrassed the crown enough to see it swiftly retaken not long after. Even into the 17th century, the castle still had a role to play. In 1605, Sir William Cranstoun, later First Lord of Cranstoun, was appointed keeper, and in 1624, King James allocated £1,600 for repair. But no work was ever carried out, the money disappeared, and that's when the castle began its slow decline. By the mid-1600s, Loch Maben had faded from power. It had endured siege, royal visits and rebellion, but its days of influence were now over. What remained was stone, story, and the long shadow of a fortress that had once shaped a nation's fate. Today the castle stands in ruins, a crumbling shell at the edge of Castle Loch, its walls broken and overgrown, its towers open to the sky. There are no guards, no halls, no roaring fires. But Loch Maben hasn't been entirely abandoned. Stories have clung to the site for centuries, and for a place that witnessed so much conflict, so much power and betrayal, perhaps it's no surprise that something might remain. Not in the history books, but the cracks between them. Loch Maben plays host to one of the strangest and most chilling modern legends in Scottish paranormal lore, that of the Loch Maben vampire. In the early 1990s, veteran ghost hunter Tom Robertson, a name well known in Scotland's paranormal circles, was contacted by locals in the Loch Maben area. The reason was troubling. Several animal carcasses, sheep, dogs, even a fox, had been found scattered near the ruins of the castle. But it wasn't just the fact they were dead. The bodies had been completely drained of blood. There were no signs of tearing, no scattered remains like you might expect from a wild animal attack. Just strangely intact corpses, pale and dry, as though something had drawn every last drop from them. It was strange enough that rumours began, not just of predators or poachers, but of something far older. Something that didn't belong in the woods of Dumfries and Galloway. Robertson, curious and concerned, made the journey to Loch Maben to investigate. He conducted stakeouts around the castle, spending long hours in the dark woods, waiting and watching. It was during one of these vigils in 1991 that he had the encounter that would change everything. According to his own words, he'd been moving carefully through the trees, torch in hand, when he froze. Not because of what he heard, but what he saw. Suddenly I was face to face with the most hideous sight, a walking, decomposing corpse, Robertson recalled. It had a grey, vein-riddled face and coal-black eyes. This grotesque beast looked like it had crawled out the grave. He described the figure as humanoid, tall and hooded, cloaked in what looked like sackcloth. Its features were partially rotted, as if in some state of decay, and yet it moved with unnatural agility. The most disturbing thing wasn't just how it looked, but how it felt. Robertson said he was overwhelmed by a sense of pure evil. The figure turned to him slowly, fixing him with a stare he would never forget. It stopped and turned its head towards me, glared at me with evil intensity. Then, without a sound, it vanished into the trees, not running, but gliding, as if weightless. Robertson was naturally shaken to his core, a hardened investigator with decades of experience, including TV appearances in the 1960s, and he was not easily spooked. But what he saw that night at Loch Maben rattled him. Later, he told journalists and paranormal researchers that he was convinced, absolutely and without question, that he had come face to face with a vampire. Not the seductive gothic creature of novels, but a raw, primal revenant. A corpse that walked, a thing that fed. 8 years later, in 1999, Robertson returned to Loch Maben. He said the pool to go back had been building and he wanted to find answers. Armed this time with a camera and a renewed sense of determination, he again patrolled the woods near the ruin. What happened next was perhaps even more shocking than the first encounter. He claimed they saw the figure again, the same hooded, rotting entity, standing not far from the tree line. This time he was ready. He managed to raise his camera and snap a photograph just before it vanished. The image, later shared with local paranormal groups and published in Scottish folklore sites, is grainy and indistinct, but to believers this is proof. For Robertson, it was confirmation that he hadn't imagined the first encounter, that something was, and perhaps still is, at Loch Maben. The legend might have ended there, an isolated modern haunting, if not for a deeper, older pattern lurking beneath it. Some folklorists and local historians began making connections, not just between Robertson's reports and the drained animals, but between his accounts and an ancient tale from nearby Annandale. Back in the 12th century, chronicler William of Newburgh recorded a terrifying story of a revenant, a walking corpse, that haunted a village not far from Loch Maben. The creature, described as a foul carcass, was said to have risen from the grave shortly after burial and began terrorising the living. Its breath was said to spread disease, and its presence brought fear and death in equal measure. The villagers, desperate and afraid, eventually exhumed the corpse. They cut out its heart and burned it, a ritual rooted in ancient belief that fire could purify what death could not. Only then did the strange deaths and hauntings stop. This tale, recorded in medieval Latin and preserved in historical texts, has all the elements of vampire folklore, long before the word vampire entered common use in Britain. The similarities with the Loch Maben story are uncanny. A walking corpse, signs of feeding, disease and dread, and the belief that what had been buried did not stay buried. Some have speculated that the same spirit, or the same type of entity, might be behind both tales. Others have drawn a darker connection still. According to one piece of local lore, a member of the Bruce family who built the first castle at Loch Maben in the 12th century was said to have been touched by a revenant. Bitten, perhaps, cursed. The story claims a dark affliction followed that branch of the family, a curse that would awaken again centuries later. This part of the legend remains vague and speculative, but it does add a compelling layer to the mythos surrounding Loch Maben. A cursed family line, a ruined stronghold, and a creature that walks between history and nightmare. This story has since gained a following among paranormal enthusiasts. It has featured in ghost tours, podcast discussions, and articles on Scotland's strangest hauntings. The Dumfries-based team, mostly ghostly, even conducted an investigation into the legend, consulting local historians and hosting events at the site. Skeptics argue that Robertson may have been mistaken, that stress, fatigue, or misidentification played a role. But even the most rational explanations leave room for questions. What drained those animals? Why did Robertson, an experienced investigator, remain so convinced of what he saw? To this day, some believe the vampire still haunts the area. They claim the woods around the castle are strange at night. The kind of place where torches flicker unexpectedly and cold settles deep in the bones. Visitors still leave reports online, often without knowledge of the legend, claiming to feel watched or uneasy among the ruins. And in the end, the vampire is more than just a scary story. It's a bridge between the ancient and the modern, a case where centuries-old folklore may have resurfaced in the 1990s, wearing a familiar but terrifying face. And if Robertson was right, it's still out there. Not all hauntings involve ghosts. Some places are haunted in other ways, by fear and the memory of what happened there. Loch Maben is long known for its role in Scotland's Wars of Independence, but it also bears the mark of something more insidious: the history of witchcraft, accusation, and execution. While many Scottish castles have connections to folklore and superstition, Loch Maben's link to witchcraft is unusually specific, not just in local legend but in actual court records, tied to one of the most infamous witch hunt episodes in Scottish history, the North Berwick trials of 1590 to 1591. These trials, conducted under the personal supervision of King James VI, were brutal, far-reaching, and deeply theatrical. Dozens were accused of conspiring with the devil to harm the king, sink ships, or wreak havoc on the kingdom through storms and curses. Among them was Barbara Napier, an Edinburgh gentlewoman caught in the rising tide of paranoia and blame. What makes Napier's case so notable for Loch Maben is that she wasn't just accused of devil worship or fake malice. According to her indictment, she had sought magical assistance for a very specific military moment: the siege of Lochmaben Castle in 1588. At the time, the castle was in the hands of the powerful Maxwell family, and Lord Maxwell had raised the rebellion against the Protestant monarchy. James VI responded with force, bringing in troops and even requesting gunpowder shipments from Edinburgh. As we know, this was a period of tension, religious fracture, and political instability. And it seems Barbara Napier wanted to keep her husband safe amidst it all. According to witnesses, Napier approached Agnes Sampson, one of the best-known accused witches in the North Berwick trials. Sampson, a healer and midwife, was said to have provided Napier with protective charms to keep her husband safe while he served during the raid of Dumfries and the siege of Loch Maben. The implication wasn't that Napier used magic offensively, but that she turned to it in desperation, as many would have done in uncertain times. One surviving document states plainly, she was said to have asked Agnes Sampson to protect her husband by magic while he served at Loch Maben. In modern terms, it almost sounds benign, the equivalent of carrying a lucky charm or whispering a prayer. But in 16th century Scotland, such acts were loaded with peril. To seek supernatural aid, even for protection, was seen as a gateway to darker dealings. Worse still, to consult someone like Agnes Sampson, already under suspicion, was enough to cast a shadow. King James, who had recently survived a stormy sea voyage that he was convinced had been conjured by witches, personally attended Napier's trial. Obsessed with rooting out diabolical plots, James took a particular interest in elite women like Napier, whose social standing may otherwise have shielded them. Her fate, however, is murky. Some records suggest she was found guilty of consorting with witches, but not sentenced to death. Others hinted she may have been quietly released. What is undeniable is the link her case draws between Lochmaben Castle and the use of magic in warfare, a rare and specific association, suggesting that this fortress, already steeped in national conflict, had become a battleground of spiritual as well as physical forces. But the castle's connection to witchcraft doesn't end there. Loch Maben and its surrounding lands held judicial power for centuries. The barony had the authority to try, sentence and execute those found guilty of crimes, including witchcraft. While a nearby town's gallows were used for more common punishments, those accused of witchcraft were subject to special forms of execution, and local history describes two distinct fates. Women convicted of minor crimes were often drowned in a pit known as the Cock Pool, located within or near the castle grounds. But for the heinous crime of witchcraft, there was no mercy. Those accused were led to Gallows Hill, a mound just outside the castle walls. There, they were burned at the stake. The location chosen deliberately, elevated, visible and final. One antiquarian account describes a fosse or pit adjacent to the castle, a grim reservoir for drowning female prisoners. Others mention a stone platform nearby where executions were carried out before gathered crowds. Though detailed records of individual burnings are scarce, the tradition of witch persecution in Dumfries and Galloway is well established, and Loch Maben played its part. A line from local folklore, repeated in walking tours and storytelling circles, states plainly, 9 women, condemned as witches, were led to their fate at the Castle Loch. Whether this is a precise record or folkloric summary, it reflects the memory the place holds, one of fear, persecution and finality. To be condemned as a witch in Loch Maben was not just to die, but to be erased, reduced to ash, or drowned beneath the waterline. It's not difficult to imagine how such events could leave a mark, not only in the land, but in local consciousness. Tales continue to be reported of screams heard by the loch at night, of sudden cold spots near Gallows Hill, and of strange impressions left in the soil near the execution sites. Whether these are simply the products of fertile imagination or something more, they echo the very real suffering that occurred there. Today we know the castle stands in ruins. Its stone walls are crumbling, ivy creeping through the arrow slits, silence setting over what was once a seat of power. But to those who know its deeper history, it's more than a ruin. It's a place of trials, not just political or military, but spiritual. A site where belief itself was put to death, where fear of the unknown claimed real lives. And Loch Maben's story doesn't end with ruin, not entirely. In fact, some say the castle is more active now than it ever was in life. For decades, locals and visitors have reported strange activity in and around the site. And while the fortress may have lost its towers and garrison, it hasn't lost its presence. In recent years, a new chapter has been written, not in war or politics, but in shadows, sensations, and the kind of sightings that keep you looking over your shoulder. One of the most credible groups to investigate the site is the one we previously mentioned, mostly ghostly. The group have spent years uncovering the supernatural heritage of southern Scotland, and Loch Maben has become one of the most talked about locations. During their nighttime investigations and storytelling events, the team has gathered both historical and modern reports, and among the most frequently discussed are sightings of a phantom drummer boy, whose rhythmic beats have been heard echoing through the site in the early hours, and a ghostly horseman said to patrol the outer path along the loch's edge. Some accounts claim he's headless, others describe a full figure, cloaked and silent, vanishing into the trees. People have also reported cold spots in the ruins, sudden pockets of freezing air, often in midsummer, as well as strange audio anomalies picked up on recording devices. And one investigator described a voice capture and playback that hadn't been heard in the moment, low, guttural, and speaking words they couldn't quite make out. All these accounts aren't just shadowy legends, They're part of the documented legal and social history of the region, and they add weight to the castle's darker reputation. It's this combination of sources, trial records, local tradition, and atmospheric ruins that give Loch Maben its unique place in Scottish paranormal history. It's rare to find a site where so many threads intersect: vampirism, witchcraft, traditional hauntings, and credible modern encounters. And it's why the castle continues to draw investigators, writers, and those who are simply curious. The ruin itself has no lights, no signage, and no formal access after dark. But for those who do visit, especially alone or in the half-light of dusk, the atmosphere is hard to shake. As one modern visitor put it, "I didn't see anything, but I didn't stay long. Something about that place. It doesn't want you there after dark." Loch Maben may no longer command armies or decide the fate of kingdoms, but it hasn't lost its hold entirely. Its influence is subtler now, found in stories, memory, and the sense that something unresolved still haunts that castle. And if the accounts are to be believed, it may not be entirely empty. Loch Maben is a ruin now. The stone is broken, the paths overgrown, but it hasn't disappeared. The site still draws people in: walkers, historians, ghost hunters, people who simply stop and look. Something about the place holds people's attention. Maybe it's the setting, maybe it's the history, or maybe it's the feeling that this place was never just a building. It was an expression of control and of resistance. The castle's story is one filled with power struggles, a Scottish stronghold seized by an invading king, a timber fortress replaced with stone to make a statement: this land belongs to someone else now. A garrison installed to hold the region, ancient symbols removed, and authority enforced. But it didn't last. Less than a century later, it was torn down again. Not as an act of war, but as a message, a refusal, a deliberate undoing of what had been imposed. Over the years, the castle passed between hands: lords, kings, keepers, rebels. Its walls were rebuilt, reshaped, and eventually left to fall. Yet the core story stayed the same. Someone always wanted to take hold of it, and someone else always fought back. And that's a pattern that runs through the folklore too. The vampire legend, whether viewed as fiction or something stranger, isn't just a ghost story. It's about a figure that refuses to die. A force that reappears when people assume it's been buried for good. The witch trials echo that same theme. Attempts to control, to silence, to punish anyone seen as dangerous or different. And again, those stories don't disappear. Those stories are still told, and they still frighten. To me, none of this feels accidental. The land around Loch Maben has carried legends of push and pull, between belonging and occupation, belief and erasure, silence and testimony, for hundreds of years. And in the more peaceful moments, it invites you to think about what kind of stories we take with us today. Because resistance isn't always loud. It doesn't always come in battles or declarations. Sometimes it's in what remains. The places that weren't wiped away, and the people who keep the questions alive, sharing the stories others hoped would fade. I think it's worth thinking about that now, especially in the times we're living through. In an age where some would rather rewrite history, simplify it, or twist it to suit new agendas, places like Loch Maben matter. They show us what happens when power is imposed from above, when symbols are used to dominate, and when that power is pushed back against. Not always cleanly, not always with victory, but often with clarity. You can still walk the grounds. You can still stand at the edge of the loch and see where the old fortress rose, where the siege lines would have formed, where decisions were made about who belonged and who didn't. And if you listen, the stories haven't gone quiet. They speak of people who refused to be forgotten, people who stood against what they were told was inevitable. And if there's something to take from Loch Maben now, beyond the ghost stories and legends, it might be that the past doesn't sit still, it resurfaces, it resists, and so can we.